Kia ora hui hui anō tātou. Tuata hei kai te mihira ki tātā tai upe. Wahara mai ni duani ni a tātai. Kia ora rau koe e te whaia wana tēnei ka mihia. O tira ki nā tau hau wa tau mai ni duani ni a mātou ki a tātou i tēnei. O tira i te whakaritera ki te ahutana ki a tātou te arawhata no tātou no tēnei rā. O reira kia ingoia ki tātou. E hua te matua te tamata wairua tapu nei tāpuro nei tuatu nei ki mai tō uaruaru ki tuku whakamoimi te whawhetai atu ki a koe. Nā mana ki tana hiu mene be kia mātou i nā rāpua ka hure a tainō mai nei ki tēnei hau. Ina rai te ahata nā tēnei hui hui nā mātou e tō mātou atua ni rai te whakamana i tēnei o mātou e tō mātou atua. Aki nā tohura kai te hoatsu i hati ai e tēnei rai tō mātou atua. Nō reira kai tino e te tani tino atu ki a koe kia tautunu mai tā manaki ina kia mātou katoa taino atu rai te mutu nā tēnei rai tō mātou atu. Kia haere re tanu koe ki wāni nui a mātou kia tapatahia i o mātou nā kau kia. I te atua nā manu e noho nei te rani ko koe tō mātou he para e kore hapa. Ko koe anō hai whakahokia ki o mātou wairua e arahi nei a mātou ki nā ara ki tika. E whakaaro hoki nā ki tō ingoe te atua tahunia mātou ki arite ki tō watawhara. Ki tini a uaro hatana te muru nā mātou hara. E te atua whakorono ki tā mātou karana. Tahuri mai i au tarina ki a mātou i noi. Ai pirina koe mō mātou hai pākahai o mātou huari i katoa. Kurori e ki tō ingoa tapu. Amen. Tātou ai. Te gloria, manarongo ki te whenua, whakaro, ai ki nā tangata katoa, ake tatamai taurina ki te whakaore a mātou. Arae a tia mātou nā whakawai nā te awa te kiko a te rewera. Nā hoki mātou e tipu ai tēnei ao. Gloria ki tō ingoa tapu. Amen. Amen.
Tangi te titi ka, tangi te ka, tangi hoki a hao, tihi maui ora. Ina mana, ina reo, a rakatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko wai au, o te poti a hao, ko kotarani te iwi, e kaimahi a hao te whare wānanga o tākau ko Richard Blakey tāka wingawa. Greetings everyone, what a wonderful occasion. My name is Richard Blakey, I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Enterprise at the University of Otago, and I'll be saying a few words as part of the hui and doing some other things along the way. E auraki Professor Ruru, tēnā koe. Members of the academic party, too many to name, tēnā koutou. Moana Maria Poto, MC for the day, tēnā koe. We've got Athena Tahana Clark and Dr. Rebecca Kittle, our other two speakers today, tēnā korua. Also to colleagues from the Faculty of Law, Te Potama Māori, Hawaii University, members of the public here or in the overflow room or via streaming or watching in the future, wider colleagues and whānau of Professor Ruru, the recipient of the 2022 University of Otago Distinguished Research Medal, the highest honour that we bestow annually. No mai, haramai, welcome. I bring first apologies from our Acting Vice-Chancellor, Professor Howard Nicholson, although it looks like there wouldn't have been a seat for her anyway with the attendance we've got, who I know would have loved to have been here today, had schedules permitted. But it is traditional for the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research to officiate at the DRN medal lecture, as it is the DVC Research that chairs the panel that makes the selection. My role, therefore, is to tell you a little bit about the award before I hand over to Professor Andrew Ekatoni as the co-chair of Te Potama Māori to more formally introduce Professor Ruru to you all. Should the hui go to plan, and should you all agree by acclamation at the end, I will also have the privilege of formally presenting you the medal and after some acknowledgements from your Dean, Professor Shelley Griffiths. So, for the Distinguished Research Medal, given that you're in the Faculty of Law, we better go to the regulations. They state that the recipient will be chosen for their outstanding research achievements, sustained contributions to the research environment, impact on the academic disciplines and or communities with which the research has been engaged, and service to the university. Outstanding research achievement can include the discovery and dissemination of new knowledge, or the development of concepts that lead to significant advances. Sustained contributions to the research environment can include leadership of significant national or international research activities, sustained mentorship or development of researchers, and outstanding service to iwi, government, industry, and other community partners. Impact can include the adoption of research findings in disciplinary thinking, uptake of research in policy, industry, iwi, and other community settings, or implementation of research by practitioners of the field. Service might include how your work has supported the university's guiding principles, including honouring the treaty partnership, sustainability, social responsibility, academic freedom. I say all of those things because I'm sure that many of you will know, and we will see today, that Professor Ruru has met all of those attributes at the highest standard, so is a most deserving recipient. The medal also comes with an invitation to present a public lecture or hui, which is why we're here today, and a modest grant to support research-related activities of the recipient. And I think there are some posters and other collateral around us that Jacinta has applied some of that modest grant funding to. So, as a major award, unlike others like, let's say, the Nobel Prize, where up to 3 awards can be made in any one discipline in any one year, we have to select one recipient across all of the disciplines from the university, where we have to balance overall career-long scholarly and community achievement with discrete world-changing discoveries that are often sufficient for some awards. Putting the scale of the exercise into context, we have about 1,600 academic staff at the university who, again, are eligible for nomination. And we've been making this award since about 2004, so there's about 16 to 20 people in this very exclusive club, representing about 1% of our academy. Consider also that to be appointed to an academic or research position at the University of Otago is also highly selective. We typically get more than 100 applicants for any one position, another 1% selection. And finally, even gaining the academic qualifications to be eligible for an academic position is about another further 1% exercise. Although I should note that in Ōtepoti Dunedin, New Zealand's smartest city, about 2% of the population are PhD qualified. Hence, we are here to recognise the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. So, Jacinta, today you are officially the smartest person in New Zealand's smartest and most beautiful city. So, on behalf of the university, please accept our congratulations on being our most recent DRN recipient. Applause. Now, you've chosen to organise this chaired conversation as a format to present your research and its influence, and we're thrilled that Moana Maniopoto has agreed to be your chair. Welcome again, Moana. I'm sure that most of us are familiar with the breadth and depth of your influence, but as a refresher, Moana Maniopoto, Te Aroa Ngāti Tuwhare Toa, is a singer and songwriter inducted into the New Zealand Music Hall of Fame in 2016. She is a documentary filmmaker, journalist, art laureate, and a law graduate from the University of Auckland, where she is also a distinguished alumni. Moana is the associate producer, host, and journalist for the award-winning current affairs show Te Ao with Moana on Whakaata Māori, and we thank her for being with us today. So on with the proceedings. Jacinta's nomination came through Te Potama Māori, our Māori Academic Staff Caucus. So I now invite Professor Ruru Ekatani as a co-chair of TPN to come forward to provide the formal introduction to Professor Jacinta Ruru. Thank you very much.
Tihei mauri ora, te mea tuatahi ke wehi ki te atua, tuaroa me whakahone i te kini Māori atu heitia. E te mana whenua tēnei rohe ngai tahu whānui, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ki te rangatira o te rā, Jacinta, tēnā koe, ki te pautupu manoa o Ngāti Tūwhare Toa, ona tēnā koe. Ki ngā rangatira o te whare wānanga o Tāgau, tēnā koutou, kia tātou katoa, ngā ui ngā hauwha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Sorry, I forgot to mihi also to Ngāti Tūroko, mihi mahana ki ngā rangatira o Roko. So I'm Ruru Ekatani, one of the co-chairs of the Pautama Māori Academic Staff Caucus. My other co-chair said she was going to stand next to me. She's hiding over there, real quick. And we're the ones that wrote the nomination. Thank you for Jacinta, Distinguished Professor Jacinta Ruru, to receive this distinguished medal. One of the things as a lecturer, what you want to do is how do I take something really complex and explain it to my students so that they understand. And so this is my task here, is how can I make you understand the depth, the breadth of Jacinta's research, her influence on Māori society, on legal society, on Indigenous society throughout the world. And so I'm really just having to summarise something very quickly. She's the first, her research is held in the highest regard, not just within Indigenous communities, but also the tertiary sector, the legal profession, local authorities, environmental agencies, government departments. It is widely cited and translated. It's not just something that sits in a university. It goes right throughout the world, influencing policy and practice. She has numerous extensive awards and appointments. First Māori woman along with Professor Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, to become a Fellow of the Royal Society. Aotearoa, New Zealand's first Māori Professor of Law. She holds many significant awards, including the University of Otago Centennial Distinguished Professor Award. A distinguished professor is sort of like, you can only have 10 at a time, I think it is. It's the maximum of the important scholars. Not about, sorry, I just saw one of my old mates sitting over there. A local Kiwi Bank hero, Prime Minister Supreme Teaching Award, the New Zealand Order of Merit. She's one of the two leads that enabled University of Otago in Auckland to secure the Ngā Pai o Te Manamatanga Centre for Research Excellence, and then became the co-director. She is an outstanding, distinguished academic whose work has had significant impact. In particular, work has supported the definition of important areas of law and interdisciplinary research globally. So in the political sphere, on the Treaty of Waitangi, environmental reform, constitutional reform, she's one of the authors of the He Puapua document. In the legal sphere, she's published in research on the doctrine of discovery, the Māori legal system, Waitangi Tribunal, Indigenous land and water, including contributing to the recognising of rivers as having a legal personality, water reform with Te Mana o Te Wai, the caring for waterways that underpins the Three Waters reforms, research on the seabed and foreshore, publications on Indigenous land title, national parks, the status of maunga. In education, she's working to indigenise the law degree so that tikanga is taught throughout all papers. She gathers together Māori scholars in one of the big publication that's sitting there on the desk. She is a leading scholar on Indigenous rights and issues across the world. Over 100 publications, mostly self-authored, in other words, done on her own. Author and editor of 10 books, 51 invited book chapters. That's double more than I've ever seen before. 54 journal articles. She is a major international scholar. Always strategic, always thinking 2 steps ahead. She leads because she has an idea where to go and is always correct. And we follow her because we think, where's Jacinta gone? She's up there. She's like that scout saying, come this way, come this way. And we think, oh, well, she's found the right way to go. But not only is she an impressive scholar, you can knock on her door and interrupt her. She's always encouraging to everyone she meets. She's always happy to see people. A great person, a great scholar. A true rangatira. Someone who weaves and brings people together to create beautiful and meaning korowais as the one she was wearing before. I ngā mana, I ngā reo, I ngā raurangatira mā. It is a great honour for me to introduce distinguished Professor Jacinta Ruru.
Tēnā koe e te rangatira, kia koutou, koe mihi mai kia hau, kia tātou katoa, nā mihi. He honore nui tēnei, kia noho I waenganui a koutou ki te whakarongo ki nei kupu arawe, ki te kōrero ki tēnei tino tohunga, āhua wiri a hau. Nō reira tēnā koutou kia kōrua, te whānau, te māma, te pāpā, tēnā kōrua. It's such a privilege to be here. I'm a little bit intimidated. Usually I'm interviewing politicians and people that don't really know a lot about the treaty, so I'm quite rapt. And I came down from Auckland last night. People said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Dunedin. They said, gosh, why? I said, well, this very brainy professor is getting a very flash award. So I just want to acknowledge Jacinta's parents and whānau, because it must be a thrill watching their daughter receive these accolades, and much of it I'm sure can be attributed to your support. So ngā mihi kia kōrua. Congratulations to you, Jacinta, because brainy people like you and the other academics in this room, you lend us your expertise to legitimise things that we know instinctively and that we know represents the value of mātauranga Māori. You know, you do the hard yards, you put it all together, you pull it together, you develop a body of research which is then utilised by activists and policy makers, communities and journalists and people that really want to make a difference. So thank you for all of your achievements and the achievements represented in this room. I just have to mention that she's quite an organiser, so she's got this whole thing, and look, she's got a ticking bloody clock here. I don't know maths, so it's just, you know, it doesn't mean anything to me, so I'm just going to plough ahead. But I just want to begin by teasing out the importance of Māori research. Okay, so you'll push for a bilingual, bicultural legal system that aligns with Te Tiriti o Waitangi obligations, and you're an advocate for a bijural legal education. That's the first time I heard that word when I read that. That reaffirms the existence of 2 legitimate forms of law, which I, as a law student who graduated last century, struggled to even find mention of. So could I ask you where your starting point is? Do you start in Te Ao Māori or Te Ao Pākehā? How do you approach things?
Well, just kia ora koutou.
Oh, sorry. Say hello, say hello.
I feel very overwhelmed. Amazing to be here, so thank you everyone. So where do I start? I mean, I think growing up in the Ngaitahu Takiwā, in Glenorchy there, at the head of Lake Kokatupu, with the beautiful mountains and the forests, and knowing that it was the Ngaitahu lands, but not seeing their stories, the importance of that place to Ngaitahu, which was like the whole centre to the whole economic resource for Ngaitahu with the Pounamu and so on. So I don't know, seen a lot of gaps and missed opportunities from a really young age, and that carried on into my education, coming through all of high school actually. I really do remember in fifth form, which my daughter Ariana is sitting here, is, gosh, what is it now? Year 10. No, year 11 will be fifth form. It was the first time I had read a Māori author, and that was Whittington Maida and then Patricia Grace. And that moment has really stayed with me. So I've been always trying to find and place myself in that Te Ao Māori perspective, and to bring that perspective with me in all of my studies and all of my approaches to life. Because as you said in your experience of going through law school, we didn't really feature in the law curriculum. And even though we've got our whānau stories of dispossession from lands, that's a deliberate use of that colonial law from Anafaras and Dokawa from the 1860s onwards. And they are a very important part of who we are and how our contestation with the Aotearoa New Zealand legal system. And that didn't appear in the curriculum. And so, I don't know, I've been surrounded by incredible, amazing people, and seeing those opportunities for change has been easy because there's so much to do.
So I remember the very first huinga Roya, Joe Williams and I drove down from Auckland, and we were kind of talking about, oh, this is going to be one of those radical things. We're going to totally disrupt the system and transform it, or we're going to brown it up. So we didn't know what was going to happen. So we got to that meeting, lots of debate, looked like it was going to brown up. And so I didn't go back. So I went and did something else. But it's quite a big decision to decide where to place yourself within a system that has, institutionally and historically been antagonistic towards Māori. So how did you decide where to place yourself and to stay inside it?
Yeah, thank you for recognising that, because it has been. It is very, very hard, and it continues to be very hard for Māori. Right from the beginning, we've got this amazing Te Rōpū Whaipūtaki. So Kristen Maynard, an amazing Māori law student back in 1993 from Ngāti Porou, came and set up a group for us as Māori law students. And that's what I kind of fell into, and my arms, wrapped around this beautiful group of Māori students. And we would go to Te Hongaroia, we would get in the shuttle van, and we'd drive from here, all the way up to Kirikiriroa, and it was mostly just a group of women in the van, and we'd be arguing, and there'd be all sorts of dramas taking place as we arrived up there. But it was so formative. And those experiences of crossing the ferry and staying at the Te Rōpū Whaipūtaki alumni who had graduated a year or two before us. And so I've come into something that had already been created, and really felt that warmth and that support. I was very lucky in the appointment. It was Professor Richard Sutton who appointed me into the law faculty role, and recognised that I was on my own as a Māori scholar in the law faculty, and he very deliberately gave me, about the first 6 weeks of my job, this kind of, to me it felt like an unlimited budget. It gave me this deliberate intent to travel around all the other law schools and spend time with the Māori law scholars there. And so I just had lots of opportunities to be weaved into that fabric of Māori support. Te Hongaroia Māori, the Māori Law Society, was already up and running by the time I came through law school. And so always really appreciative of that.
You're such a young thing, aren't you? Now look, the first time and last time I was with Jacinta was at the Auckland Writers' Festival, and so I curated 4 sessions, and I thought, well, the most radical piece of writing that emerged a couple of years ago was He Puapua. It was written in a couple of months, and it generated a huge uproar and some of the worst reviews I've ever seen. One reviewer from Papakura said it was separatism by stealth. That was Judith Collins. Another reviewer, actually it wasn't all just Pākehā slam in it, there was a reviewer, a Ngāpuhi one, who used the words "a palace coup by the Māori caucus leading to an ethno-state." That was a reviewer, David Seymour. And then a third reviewer A third reviewer slammed it as a deliberate plan to create a separatist race-based system. Ngāti Waingapohi, Ngāti Hine, that's your whanaunga, Winston Peters. So the critics slammed He Puapua, and the rest of us thought, what on earth is in this thing? It was slammed for its pernicious pathways. I don't even know what that means, but... So He Puapua didn't just pop out of anywhere. How did the body of existing Māori research inform that report?
Significantly. So we took all of our drivers for He Puapua, which was a group of 9 of us, 5 Māori, 4 Pākehā. Some of them were government officials that were on there.
And was that challenging, that part?
Not amazing. Everyone on there was absolutely committed and amazing. To see something incredible that we could do for Aotearoa, particularly leading into 2040, the 200th year of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and how we could take the drivers from all that incredible work of the Waitangi Tribunal, all the amazing work of Māori scholars over, decades and decades, since the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and particularly the Iwi Leaders Forum, their commitment into constitutional change with Moana Jackson and Margaret Mutu and the designing of Mātiki Mai that had come out a few years before. So all the submissions into government we went through, all the aspirations for where we could change our country. So
could I just ask you to clarify what was the point? What was the goal? What was the vision?
The vision was, and this was deliberately given to us by the Minister of Māori Affairs at the time, was to create a pathway, the start of a plan for how Aotearoa New Zealand could become compliant with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. At that time, when we came together in 2019, we were supposed to come out as the first in the world to create an action plan for our country, to actually start to put into realisation something that we'd already committed ourselves to internationally with that United Nations Declaration, the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Canada's now beat us to it. They beat us quite quickly after that.
So were you surprised at the response?
Yeah, we were frustrated that the whole thing became politicised. It also caught up. We finished that work, we were given about 10 weeks. It was all on top of our day jobs. I'm looking at my dean here. and so it was an incredible amount of work that we did over a very short period of time. It was supposed to be released at Waitangi Day in that February in 2020. COVID was starting to build up, and then it got caught up in COVID. It never then got released properly, and so it became a political mess, really, which is a real shame because it is a roadmap. We took all the indicators that were already sitting within government around how we could move in the next 18 months to 2 years to 5 years, 10 years, and take us through to 2040. There are amazing initiatives in there around, one of them was, wouldn't it be neat for us as a country to be able to really know the iwi boundaries of where we live and how we move from one takiwā, one roki, one area into another one, that we know that where we are living, where we are residing. And we thought, so there's a lot of incredible things as part of He Puapua. The real image of He Puapua was starting off with these spheres and recognising that there's this big sphere of kāwanatanga where the colonial government, the Crown today, dominates in making all of our decisions for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that's our kāwanatanga sphere, and there's a really tiny little red dot for our tino rangatiratanga sphere where we as Māori are able to exercise our tino rangatiratanga, mostly on the marae. And then there's this growing sphere where a joint management, where we are coming together for decision making. It's still very small. And the idea was to shift those images of those spheres to 2040, where we have a decreased kāwanatanga sphere and an increased tino rangatiratanga sphere, trying to achieve something that our ancestors committed to back in 1840.
So what's the relationship between He Puapua and Mātiki Mai?
Very close relationship. We built on that. So Mātiki Mai is incredible work from 2015 by Moana Jackson, Margaret Mutu. The constitutional change, it was work that they spent years and years travelling around Aotearoa, New Zealand. I think it was like over 350 hui engagements. And that document, Mātiki Mai, sets out 6 options for constitutional change for Aotearoa in New Zealand. So 6 different ways we can grow that tino rangatiratanga sphere. And so we took that whole idea and then tried to put together a draft roadmap for how to implement it. And that was He Puapua. It's meant to just be a discussion document.
Oh, it got discussion, all right, jeepers. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you hear talk about people going, we need a national debate around the treaty or co-government or something. We've been having it like since forever, But so you set up these models. I mean, when I listen to you talk and the work that's been done, I just think how often, and it's kind of reflected in one of your books here too, is that the use of imagination and creativity and dreaming isn't really encouraged a lot. There's a lot of kind of, this is the counterpoint. This is the positive counterpoint, like Mātiki Mai and He Puapua. They imagine a different way of doing things, don't they?
They do, and I think being Māori, being on the marae, I think there's always those opportunities to rethink, to reimagine, and to know that we can do things better in Aotearoa. We can create more respectful relationships that are going to be inspiring and amazing for all of us as a country. And I truly believe that, and I think that's what, particularly as I'm looking around at many of my colleagues as Potama Māori, our Māori Academic Staff Caucus, I mean, that's what excites us, that's what we talk about all the time, is around how we can build on our ancestral knowledge to create pathways forward that are going to really, we're really going to make this country make sense for all of us.
So it must be challenging to keep your optimism up. But she's a perky type, isn't she? Honestly, I mean, why don't you just, I believe you. So I'd like to just pick up on Anaru's comments and talk about the importance of environmental legal research to transform environmental law. So national parks from Tuwharetoa, I've got a sort of a bit of an interest in that. Just tell me why you started to focus on that earlier on.
Well, I think that comes back to growing up in Glenorchy, and I looked to my mum and dad, and my dad spent many times, up there in those parks, and that's how we grew up, and I love being in those places as well. And I came into my law job in 1999, and I was told I needed to do a Masters of Law. I didn't really know what that was, and I was thinking, well, I need to do it on national parks because I want to spend time in national parks. It didn't really happen, and with also the year before, the Ngaitahu Claims Settlement Act had just been enacted, and it's the most incredible statute for recognising the Ngaitahu relationship with the mountains and the rivers and the lands. And to me, that was a real catalyst moment for thinking, right, we can now do something. The Conservation Act of 1987 has a section 4 that explicitly states that the Department of Conservation must give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. If there is that mandatory commitment to give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi, that had already been in place for more than 10 years when I came into this topic of wanting to write my master's thesis. And I hadn't really seen that significant change take place in the Department of Conservation, other than the treaty settlements that were coming through. And that's still the case now. We're now like 40 years on. You would think that the Department of Conservation was being managed in like a bicultural, bilingual way, and it's not. And so I found that quite astounding, that you can have this legal commitment, but then it can be watered down. And I really wanted to understand how our treaty could be watered down when there was such a strong commitment to it in legislation. And so that was my master's thesis, and it was really exploring what, if we were going to give effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, what would our national parks look like? And then that led me on to do my PhD, which continued that whole examination of reimagining the national parks from an Indigenous perspective, and took me to Canada and working with First Nations peoples in their national parks as well.
Are there, just out of curiosity, are there many pieces of legislation now which have that nothing in this Act will be inconsistent with the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi?
Yeah, so a whole raft of our legislation across health, transport, environment, all now require decision makers to have some level of regard to te tiriti o Waitangi. But the strongest direction is still in that 1987 Conservation Act to give effect to. There is no way to work around that. Decision makers are told they must give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. But still, it's been watered down consistently through policy and court decisions.
Because isn't it that word principles that's a problem?
Part of the problem, yeah, and I think also it comes back to how far our courts wish to go, how far our Department of Conservation wish to go in realising the opportunities to recognise the practice of tino rangatiratanga in the places. What also interested me with national parks is it's a third of our country. So these places really matter. It's the third of the lands of Aotearoa in New Zealand, our maunga, our mountains, our tupuna, they are encased within these national park boundaries. And people like in Canada, the First Nations, where I'd talk to, where they've been excluded from their ancestral lands, they'll talk about there being this whole glass corridor put up that they could see into those lands, but they couldn't actually go into them. They couldn't practice who they were. And it's very similar to here in Aotearoa.
Gosh. How did your interest then move to Māori rights to the water?
That was a deliberate conversation with Te Rūmanga Ngaitahu back in the 2000s. And I wish there in Ngaitahu was wanting more work to be done with rights to fresh water, responsibilities to fresh water, particularly following a lot of the resource management case law. And so some of the work that I did back then was I examined all the cases where Māori had taken a claim through to like the Environment Court, where Māori were arguing that, for example, a commercial developer, farmers, irrigators, like Carter Holt Harvey, whether they're wanting to pollute, put stuff into water, or take things out of water. So I looked at all of those cases, and Māori were consistently, even though the courts would recognise Māori arguments, they were always being what they called balanced out by other concerns in the Resource Management Act. And it was very convincing. And looking at like a case study of about 25 of those cases, I think Māori only won 2 of those cases, and they were just a tiny little wee cases that weren't fundamental or significant in any way. And so why are Māori consistently losing in the courts when Māori are always there arguing te tiriti perspectives? And the Resource Management Act requires decision makers to have regard to not just the treaty, but also kaitiakitanga, to the recognition that our waters are in surrounding a taonga, wahitapu. So how can we have that legislative framework and still have decision making that's working against Māori?
So, because people think Māori are stakeholders.
Yeah, just to be consulted.
Yeah. So the recognition of awa and maunga having a legal personality was quite groundbreaking. Could you explain to me the nuances around that?
So this is some of the work that came out of my PhD, and drawing on other people's work as well, is thinking about how can we move forward as a country when we've got that, we're at loggerheads around ownership. Crown wants ownership, Māori want ownership. And so I developed a kind of 10 scale spectrum around if we're going to recognise actually tino rangatiratanga, we would be embracing Māori ownership, but also recognising that the Crown is not going to go there, and they create all these bottom lines for iwi when they're in Treaty of Waitangi negotiations. And one of those bottom lines is like Department of Conservation land cannot be returned to iwi. Waters cannot be, rivers, lakes cannot be owned by Māori. They're owned by, so there's all this kind of legal stuff that you've got to work through. And so trying to think of, well, what's some other options? And so drawing on Christopher Stone, a professor in the US in the 1970s, he wrote this book, Should Trees Have Standing? And in the US perspective, he was thinking about if we can give our trees, our rocks, our forests standing in the court, if they can have their own legal personality and their own legal representation, then we can ensure a voice for nature. And I was interested in that, and thinking about it in a Māori context. I wasn't interested in necessarily a voice for nature, but I was interested in how that coincides with a Māori worldview, that we already see the lands and waters alive, they already are our ancestors. So if we could think about using a concept of legal personality that's already used in law, it's used in a more of a commercial kind of context. Companies can have legal personality, so it's something that the legal system was already familiar with. Can we take that idea, put it to the environment, but make it make sense from a Te Ao Māori perspective? And Whanganui, Iwi, Tūhoi and so on, they developed that into their treaty settlements. But it's because, I don't know if that's necessarily where they would have went to first. It's the Crown endorsed it because it neutralised the ownership issue. And so it's the Crown accepted it because we're now saying that, okay, the Crown doesn't own it, but iwi don't own it, we're just going to have this middle ground and it owns itself.
Would that have been a way to resolve the foreshore and seabed thing back in the day?
Absolutely. In the foreshore seabed, that was a real moment in my career. I'd only just started in 2000. The Court of Appeal case came out in 2003, so it was only a few years into my career. And it was a hard time. It was such a hard time being Māori at the university here, seeing the country react to a Court of Appeal decision in that way was heartbreaking for us, and the huge lost opportunity that we missed as New Zealanders to know the mana whenua of our area, it was never about stopping New Zealanders from going to the beach. It was an appalling part of our political history and how politicised that was. The government was producing I've still got them, these policy documents of young white kids not being able to be on the beach, that they're not going to get access to the beach. It was all being profiled that Māori were going to be stopping people from accessing the beach. And that's not even the definition of the foreshore seabed. The foreshore seabed's that land that's either permanently or temporarily under salt water. So that's nothing to do with the beach or beach access.
Yeah, but it's everything to do with elections.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so elections are very triggering for Māori if you don't know that. And we're heading into it again. Just mentioned Law and Order about 10 million times and you'll be right. So you've said that this award here will open up even more avenues for the country and university sectors to understand and value what Māori research has to offer this country. I mean, you represent a lot of that yourself. To deal with crises, what kinds of crises do you think Māori research can address and how?
A whole lot, all of it. So in terms of the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, our mental health crisis, our poverty crisis, the homelessness crisis, all of that from a Te Ao Māori perspective is interconnected. It's all stemming from this disconnection from us as humans from the land. And when you have unwellness in the land, you're going to have unwellness in the people. It's all interconnected, and I think Māori research can really show that. Mā Tauranga can really powerfully demonstrate that interconnection. And until we get that connection worked out, we're going to continue on having these crises one after the other. And I'm looking around, there's amazing Māori researchers in this room and throughout the whole country that have so much to offer this country in terms of solutions going forward. And we just need to be brave enough as a country to really listen and hear what our Māori researchers are saying.
And it's echoed in Indigenous networks overseas, of course, too. Very familiar, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So I think I'm only 22 seconds over. Goodness gracious. Go me. We're going to have I'd like to introduce you to and invite Awhina Tahana Clark to come to the stage, and she's going to discuss with us how Jacinta's research has influenced the development of the law in the courts. Awhina is a former law student of Jacinta's and past Te Rōpū Whai Pūtake, Otago's Māori law students group. She's a current Otago representative on Te Huinga Roia Māori of Aotearoa, a former research assistant of Jacinta's and now a lawyer at Anderson Lloyd, and part of the team that represented Raukawa in High Court and Supreme Court cases that in part relied on Jacinta's research in 2022. No mai, haere mai, awhina.
Tēnā tautou e huhu mai nei I tēnei rā. Thank you, Moana, for that lovely introduction. It makes me sound a lot more impressive than I feel like I am. Thank you also, Jacinta, for the opportunity to speak at this amazing occasion, celebrating Māori research. I first met Jacinta, as Moana said, as a law student at Otago. And there weren't many Māori researchers at the time that we had assigned readings from. And it was very refreshing to see a Māori voice in the law degree at the time, which wasn't a huge amount of time ago. I then had the opportunity to work with Jacinta in my senior years, working on some of that resource management law, looking into historic Māori customary take and considering how resource management legislation should be amended to reflect the treaty more. And during that time I was able to get first-hand knowledge of, as we all see today, the genuine passion that Jacinta has for pushing the law in a direction that benefits Māori and Aotearoa New Zealand as a whole. But it was really in my transition from a law student to a lawyer where I truly saw the benefit of the Māori voice in the legal system. The Māori voice can help explain why tikanga is relevant, how it is relevant, the principles that are relevant, and the weight that can be placed on those individual principles. Māori research and writing now underpins many submissions made to the court by lawyers who, some of which are qualified, some not so much. By way of a specific example, Jacinta and Mihiata Pirini provided an affidavit for my colleagues and I on a judicial review proceeding which was coincidentally brought by the Raukawa Settlement Trust. I think the first point that came out of that was, in speaking with Jacinta and Mihiata, my colleagues and I quickly realised that our approach to how we practice law actually needed to change. They wanted to prepare one affidavit from the both of them, having a joint affidavit as opposed to two individual, which we told Jacinta and Mihiata was unusual and not how things were supposed to be done. And they came right back at us and said, no, that's like an individual affidavit is not how it's supposed to be done. You're wrong. And I think that helped us understand that mātauranga Māori, according to Te Ao Māori, is a taonga that should be shared by many, not held by one, and emphasise the importance of joint responsibility for the research content that we have today. And this speaks to the fact that the work currently being done doesn't just reform the law itself, but also how we practice the law. The content that they created with that joint affidavit commented on how specific aspects of tikanga applied in the judicial review proceedings and built on evidence provided by Raukawa Kaumātua. Their work provided guidance to the High Court and then the Supreme Court in the appeal, and both judgments were informed by the research that Jacinta and Mihiata had done and referred to their work in a very positive light. Lawyers are increasingly leaning on Māori research to inform our arguments to the court. As I said, some of us are qualified and some of us are not. Over time, there will be a cognitive shift that's already started that is occurring in how the courts apply tikanga, and then that will follow through to Parliament, hopefully. Their affidavit was also considered by the Law Commission in its work to examine how tikanga is expressed in the courts. So in providing that evidence for us, Jacinta and Mihiata have actively helped and preserve the integrity of tikanga, which ultimately is our goal in presenting this kind of evidence to the court. It also helps implant its place in Aotearoa's legal landscape. Their work is invaluable and ensuring that the knowledge is accessible to all within the legal system, from law students all the way through to Supreme Court judges. Jacinta's commitment to furthering the law has encouraged and inspired me personally from my time in law school through to today. This medal was very well deserved, Jacinta. Congratulations. Well done, that's
I'm still trying to work on upping her to come and do her masters with us.
It must be lovely when you see your students come through and they pop up out the other end and they're focused and fabulous.
Oh, it's one of the most amazing parts of the job. Like being an academic, it is one of the most, I just think it's just incredible. And one of the most amazing things is that you're part of student lives, and we've got Waipuke students here and other law students here as well, and that you're seeing them at that real transformative moment in their lives where they're coming into a study of law that they don't really know if it's for them, where it's going to take them. And that, yeah, you're part of their lives and you continue to be part of their lives and their careers as they go forward out into the adult world. And so, yeah, it's an amazing job. And seeing like Awhina and what she's achieved in name on the, on the court proceedings for the Supreme Court, like that's like a real coveted position to be as a lawyer, and she's already made that only a few years out into her career. It's really cool.
Well, she had a pretty flash professor there guiding her. I sort of think of a couple of professors that were at Auckland Uni when I went through. I'm always emailing them and picking their brains. So, big shout out to all our professors. In terms of the importance of Māori research to the nation, now at Auckland Uni we have a unit there of Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga. It's really, I know it's very significant, but could you explain to us the role of that organisational entity?
Yeah, so Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga is the New Zealand Māori Centre of Research Excellence. It was established back in 2002 by Linda Tuhiwai-Smith and Michael Walker. And at the time there was less than 10, was it 10? I can't remember, in 2002, about 10 centres of research excellence across the whole country. And that was that incredible vision back there in the early 2000s that, of course, one of these centres should be a Māori Centre of Research Excellence, where all the scientists, health scientists in particular, were really bidding for that position, that kudos to be a Centre of Research Excellence for Aotearoa New Zealand. And Linda and Michael and all those who worked with them, and their whole vision was so convincing and so needed for Aotearoa New Zealand. They were successful, and since then pretty much every Māori researcher across the country has benefited from Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga. It has had this huge vision in knowing that it has to build up the infrastructure in the tertiary context. We have to, like back then, Linda Tuhiwai-Smith will talk about, it was probably about 5 or 6 Māori who were principal investigators of researchers. We talk about them being able to all squeeze into like one of those red telephone boxes. And so we had to build up the huge infrastructure of the PhDs, the masters, PhD students coming through. We had to build the journals and the whole peer review system. We were going to publish our work. We had to build all those international connections. So this enormous amount of work began in earnest in 2002 by Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga, and all of us as Māori researchers have benefited enormously from what's been achieved. And I was really fortunate to be part of the rebidding process, because once you have a Centre of Research Excellence, you don't have it forever. Every 6 years or so, you have to convince the government that they need to reinvest into your centre. And then at that time, lots of other groups across the country are also saying, but hang on, my group is really important. I need to be a Centre of Research Excellence. So it's a big academic battle at the highest order, really. And Ngā Pai has come through a number of those big bids, and I was one of them back in 2005. And yeah, an incredible opportunity to be able to know well Māori research across the country and across all the disciplines, and see the influence that we're having as Māori across the whole spectrum of research. It was an incredible opportunity.
Are they all cited in universities?
So Ngā Pae o Te Maramatanga is, we've got co-directors, so from two different universities, so University of Auckland, University of Otago when I was there. Now that co-hosting is between University of Auckland and University of Waikato. But it's a group, so Ngā Pae o Te Maramatanga incorporates all of the universities, the 8 universities, across number of the Crown research entities, Crown research institutes, iwi research groups, the big museums, Te Papa and the Auckland Museum, which they also do a lot of research there. So this big coming together, we're 21 partners of these big entities, all working towards bringing together their Māori researchers to inspire and build the networks for our Māori students to succeed in the tertiary context. And that's the really neat thing about a Centre of Research Excellence, is that it is fixated on building the capability and capacity of researchers. And so we're able to really invest in and inspire our next generation of students to come through and do their masters, their PhD.
To what extent do they complement hapu and iwi research and knowledge?
Yeah, so very closely. So all of our Māori researchers are embedded in Māori communities, just naturally in who they are and what they wish to achieve. And like authors like, Professor Linda Tuhi-Smith, who wrote Decolonising Methodologies, it's like our blueprint for how we do research. And she, and what she says entirely makes sense to us, but we must do research that is useful to our Māori communities. And so everything that we're doing is working with Māori communities, for Māori communities.
So in this beautiful book here, which you thankfully gave me last night, which I missed during its release, but it's just stunning, and it's Ngā Kete Mātauranga, which is, I guess, co-authored by many academics who talk about their experience in the various institutions, and often very isolating. How has Ngā Pae supported them? Or how has it helped transform that kind of experience?
Well, it's given us that network, and so while I've got 2 amazing Māori colleagues now, for 20 years of my career I was the lonely only Māori, and I look around at many of our Māori academics, and many still are the lonely only Māori in their academic. And so Ngā Pae gives us that place to come together nationally and to support and inspire one another. And so this particular book here, which is a beautiful book invested by Ngā Pae o Te Maramatanga and the Royal Society Te Aparangi, enabled us to bring together the stories of about 20 Māori researchers across a whole range of disciplines, like zoology, ecology, physics, economics, history, so a whole range of disciplines at the university sector, and to demonstrate this incredible success that Māori are achieving, even though they don't have within their departments the infrastructure or the support necessarily for them to succeed as Māori. Those departments will have the support for them to succeed as, for example, a legal scholar, but not as a Māori legal scholar or a Māori geographer and so on. And so we asked our Māori researchers to talk from the heart, share with us what it is that is inspiring you to stay in academia, to continue to research, and what is it that you are trying to achieve with your research. And it's this incredible celebration of what can happen when we do embrace Māori scholars within the tertiary sector.
Do you have like an annual hui where you get everybody together?
Yeah, we do.
And do you argue and debate?
Yeah, we do. Yes, we do. And COVID has kind of interrupted that over the last few years. But even just this morning, or what is happening in this room today, is hui potama, so the Māori academic staff caucus, which includes Māori academics across this Dunedin campus, but also University of Otago campus in Christchurch and Wellington, to be able to all come together. So that's at an Otago scale. And Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga makes that happen across the whole country. And we come together and we have conferences, we have wānanga at Marae, we host a big international conference every 2 years that bring in incredible Indigenous scholars from overseas.
What's a particular piece in here that moved you and why? As you're a co-editor, weren't you?
Yes. Oh wow! I can just flick to any one of these stories. I'm looking at Anne-Marie, who's standing over here, who's profiled really beautifully. In this book, we've got Rangi Mātāmua, who's our super famous New Zealander now.
There's so many people in there whose faces I recognise, but still half of them I don't, and I celebrate that because it's just so amazing just seeing all these different people.
I really love Jane Kitson and her story down there in Invercargill. Working in ecology and so on, and how she's really tried to bring forward a Ngaitahu perspective into her discipline and the sciences. Look, there's Anne-Marie. There's just so many.
So it's a beautiful book.
One of them is,
It's a beautiful book, and it is an optimistic book because, as I said before, people talk about reimagining and dreaming, transformational stuff. So the other thing that I was really blown away by, and I looked at that stand thing downstairs with all the different books on, is this Ngā Takarangi, which is an extraordinary collection of work which represents 150 books, stunning books. I was counting them, trying to figure out how many more I needed to buy to get the whole lot, which is about 126. Were you surprised at how many amazing books are out there?
Yeah, it was an incredible initiative. It began at Waipapa Marae at the University of Auckland, and it was about 2017. And we, sort of the first time formally, Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga was hosting kind of the governors, the directors of the Royal Society, Te Aparangi, which were about to lead into their 150th celebrations. And so we're looking to do something together. And I kind of naively said, how about we just put together a selection of Māori books and we can celebrate that. And one of the motivating purposes for that is that we were hearing sort of comments that, Māori are new to writing, Māori are just new to research and so on. And we're going, well, hang on. Māori have been writing for over 200 years in the English language, so incredibly accessible to everyone in New Zealand. How come we don't know about these books? As New Zealanders, as Māori, these are very much well-loved books. And so that whole initiative came together to bring together 150 Māori books, and we continue to do incredible celebrations around Te Takarangi. It's one of our greatest passions is around these books, and we are working now with the publishers of New Zealand around republishing a lot of these books that are out of print. So over about the next 24 months, you're going to see incredible packages coming out from the publishers of some of these books that have been really hard to find, inaccessible for a long time. And we're going to give away a couple, we've created this incredible quiz. So it's 150 questions that lead into each of these books, and we've got a couple to give away.
Can you be on my team because you get most of the answers? But do you like wander around and go, no, there's 152 books, I never got those two. How are you going to add to it? What's going to happen?
So we are very deliberate around this. This is just an entry into all the incredible Māori work that exists out there. It's just a sample. And you need to know this work, and you need to know all of the work of Māori that's been going over, for 200 years of Māori writing. This is a list that ran from, that ended up at the end of 2017. And so we're going to release the next 5 years, another 20 books. We're still, Angela Wanhalo and Jeanette Wikaida and I are still kind of debating exactly which books are going to go on. It's very contestable. Once do go through a peer review process, but we still have people ring up or email us and say, why wasn't our book on that list?
touchy. Now, of course, what I think is just fantastic. I just absolutely love it. It was wonderful seeing a lot of those books, particularly a lot of the older ones that I've never seen before, on display downstairs. Now, you're also on the boards of Te Wānanga o Aotearoa and Te Papatongarewa, so you're kind of a busy person. These institutions provide other significant spaces too, don't they, for to grow research. And on that note, I'd like to invite Dr. Rebecca Kittle as the Director of New Māori Research at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, Te Manawa Haukura, to say a few words. And before I introduce you properly, just advise you that at 2:00 we will host a local launch of Te Wānanga o Aotearoa Research Centre. Rebecca Ngāti Puro Ngāpuhi is the Director of the Research Centre at Te Wānanga. She has a background in urban design and Māori identity. She holds a Marsden grant titled Making Aotearoa Places, the Politics and Practice of Urban Māori Placemaking. She's also a member of Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga, where Becky and Jacinta first met when Rebecca was designing a very cool board game. Oh, I want this. Decolonising the city. Auckland wants this. Kia ora, nau mai, haere mai.
Tēnā tātou katoa, he mihi nui ki a koutou, e tēnei rā. Kia ora, thank you for this honour of speaking today at this auspicious occasion. Unfortunately, that board game cost about $500 a pop to make, so we haven't rolled it out yet. We're waiting for a bit more funding, but we will come to you first, Moana, once we do. So I'm, as one has already said, I'm the Director of Te Manawa Haukura, a new rangaho centre at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa. I first knew of Jacinta's work when I was working in environmental studies at Victoria University. And her seminal work really provided the inspiration for my teaching as I taught on a postgraduate program entitled Māori Resource Management at the time. And her articles really became key reading for the students, and her media interviews offered a really easy in to some quite complex kaupapa around things like personhood that we've already talked about today and why. And I would use one interview of hers with RNZ on the thorny issue of who owns water as the basis of a class debate to get students thinking critically about Māori rights, te tiriti and resource management. So thank you, Jacinta, for that teaching material. So her work has been influential across the country in classrooms across the country. As an early career Māori researcher, I remember meeting Jacinta, as already has been said, through Ngā Pai o Te Māramatanga, and was immediately struck by her generosity in supporting my own research aspirations. And people have mentioned this earlier, but I really want to acknowledge your support of young Māori academics of all disciplines, so kia ora. And again, supporting this board game that originally was entitled The Decolonizer, but we felt like that might be too sort of worrying for people. Ngā Pai, for which Jacinta was the previous director, has been an important catalyst for many of us, if not all Māori researchers across the country, as already been stated. And the great thing about Ngā Pai is it transcends those institutional boundaries that we're often stuck in, profiling Māori research happening across the country and drawing together like minds to support in tautoko Māori research and Māori researchers located in sometimes quite hostile mainstream environments. One of the more recent projects, this Ngā Kite Mātauranga book, which actually includes one of my team, Dr. Morihu McDonald, was really drawn from, again, Jacinta's desire to promote the work of Māori researchers across the country. Her own research doesn't resile from difficult and contentious issues, as we've already heard. Rather, she works to forefront Māori understandings, Māori rights, and push for justice for whānau Hapuniwi and Māori communities across the country. And that kind of leadership is the leadership that those of us coming up behind are really grateful for. We all know that Māori researchers across the country in the academy are often lumbered with triple labour. And what I mean by triple labour is having to be expert in our disciplines, needing to push for real change for our people, and being the knower of all things Māori for Pāhia. And Jacinta has travelled that difficult and tiring road deftly. Finally, her desire to see the acknowledgement and valuing of Māori ways of knowing has been critical in a shift in thinking that has led to the creation of a number of Māori collectives across the country, including Te Manawa Haukura, and there's some from the team here today and others from the wānanga. So we're really pleased to come and celebrate with you, Jacinta. Your well-deserved success. Nei rā te tino mihi ki a koe e te rangasira, a kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Tēnā rā koutou katoa.
Would either of your children like to pop up here and say something about your mum? I mean, you know, you've done some research on her. What can you tell us that we don't know? You can meditate on that. You can meditate on that. So it's a wonderful celebration. It's very uplifting to come along here and hear about, because she's actually a lovely person too, eh? You know, like, you can get all these brainy, clever people and then you think, oh, I don't really want to hang out with them much. But she's the kind of person that you want to hang out with. In fact, I went to dinner with them last night with all these brainy people, all these professors. They were all quite normal. That's what I like. It's lovely. And, you know, we're dealing with big issues here. So just to conclude, I want you to save the world, but before that, something that struck me in some of the work that I've done, I did a documentary series called The Negotiators, and we looked at 7 key treaty settlements through the eyes of key negotiators like Tā Tipene O'Regan and Sir Michael Cullen. And there was this lovely part in 1990, Queen Elizabeth came up to Waitangi and a whole bunch of us were going. Anyway, I always remember Reverend or Bishop Whakahuihui Verko, you know, he was talking away and we were trying to drown him out, and then he kind of switched and he was just really fabulous, and we were going like from, and then the Queen said, and I would like to do the Queenie voice, she said, we are strong enough and honest enough to learn the lessons of the last 150 years and to admit that the treaty has been imperfectly observed. What an amazing statement. Imperfectly observed. A little bit of an understatement, but still fabulous to hear it. Now, you've suggested that Aotearoa has reached a maturity where it is ready to undertake the transformation necessary to restructure governance to realise rangatiratanga. How optimistic are you?
I am incredibly so. I really am. You know, when you go to, many New Zealanders now are opening their hearts and minds to like loving a book like this, to learning te reo, to learning waiata, to embracing more of who we are as Māori and what it means for us as a country. I can see a real shift happening across the country, and that I really believe this is our greatest hope. We've got some really good structural, systemic change that has happened. We've got the country now committed to Te Mana o Te Waig. We've got the country, we've got the whole conservation program now is recognising Te Tai Ao, like Department of Conservation has its whole motto is, thriving Papatuanuku. And we've got some real significant shift that has happened, and we just need to follow up behind that really strongly with this enormous wealth of knowledge of what it means to be Māori and what we can contribute to this country. And, I think we're ready. I just can really see it. There's this quote that sits in this book, and it comes from the late Michael Walker, and he wrote this quote, and I'll read it to you in a moment, but he He wrote this back in 1975, and it was an introduction to an incredible book, Te Ao Huri Huri, The World Moves On. If anyone's familiar with that book, it's a great book. So Michael King wrote in the introduction to that book, it's a collection of Māori writers, for Pākehās with little previous contact with Māoritanga, new educational opportunities coupled with the establishment of institutions such as urban marae and Polynesian radio stations present an opportunity to participate in what one writer has called a psychologically rich culture, from which for 100 years Europeans have taken nothing but a few place names and a great deal of plunder. And so that was written back in 1975, and while I would probably say that 10 years ago I hadn't seen much change, I think we have seen change now, and we have to build on that, and we just have to keep going in terms of celebrating Te Ao Māori and what it means to go onto a marae. And I think if we can get more New Zealanders onto marae, they will just see the incredible opportunity. At the beginning of this year, we took our 260 law students onto Otako marae. For over 50 of them, it was their first time going onto a marae. And at the end, in our poro waki, I always remember this male student standing up in tears and saying, I never knew it would be like this on a marae. This has changed my whole outlook. I've been so welcomed here this day. And it was just an incredible moment. And the more moments we can get like that are going to change our country.
Okay, so should we should just block out all the noise, which is coming at us, and hold on to that.
Yep.
So where are you going to focus your energies now? Because you've done a few things here. What's left to do?
Oh, the big thing that we've been working on is the recognition of our first laws, tikanga, as the first laws of Aotearoa in New Zealand, and therefore what does that mean for how we teach law and how we practice law in Aotearoa in New Zealand. And we've created some real structural change there. Our governing council that sets the legal curriculum has agreed from 2025 it will be compulsory in all of the 6 law schools across the country to teach tikanga as the first law of Aotearoa in New Zealand. That's a huge, significant shift, and so there's still a lot to do. When I go back to the heart of those national parks, there's still an enormous amount to do there. I still see them encased in a very, mostly, still a monolingual, monocultural, huge kawanatanga sphere operating over those national parks, and so there's still a lot more to do in how we care for our mountains and our rivers. And the more that we can bring our people into caring for those mountains and rivers, the more healthy and well we can all be as a country.
Okay. So we're nearly at the end of our celebration. I'm going to invite your dad, who might want to say a couple of words.
Oh.
No, I'm just going to go over to you. And but there's 2 book giveaways. So this is the bit where you look under your seat, and if you've got a little sticker, then you're a winner. If you haven't, that's all right. Just smile and nod. Okay.
Growing up in Northern, I got a smartphone here. I was getting older, and I said, well, this is quite promising here. Then she got to about 13, and I'm 14, and I'm going to have to move her out of this school and send her to another school. So that's been the whole life with me. We moved her to that other school, and it helped a lot. And with the help of my wife and all the friends we have here, we created Jacinta.
Are you proud of your mum?
Yes.
What about you? She got her brains too? Yes, I can tell. So thank you, Jacinta, for all your beautiful work. I think we better. It's time for a waiata, isn't it? Time for a waiata. Okay, that's where you lot pop up. Let's sing a song. This is one we might all know, and I'm going to let you know that something else happens after this. What happens after this? Okay. Oh, you give it a thing. Oh my God. So useless. Okay. Let's sing and forgot. Oh, yeah. Let's sing Puri Nei. Okay, we know that one with gusto. Okay. Puri Nei.
I'm Shelley Brooks, I'm the Dean of Factory Law. And if you don't know, it's 150 years this last April since law was first taught at the University of Otago. For 20 of those 150 years, Jacinta and I have been colleagues in the faculty. First, I want to thank Moana for coming and honouring Jacinta today and honouring us. For those of us of a certain age, Moana is part of the soundtrack of our lives. And today is not about me, which I got to sing briefly beside Moana. So thank you. As we often say on Otapoti, you should have been here on Monday. It was a lot warmer then. But thank you, and thank you for demonstrating what a wonderful practitioner you are of that art of interview as conversation, and for extracting from Jacinta the heart of what she and her research is about. And so we have a small thing, and I hope that you can keep, and as you use it, you will remember this event. And so Jacinta, on behalf of the Faculty of Law and my colleagues, some of whom are hopefully up here and the others are in the cheap seats down below, thank you for your contribution to the faculty, for being part of us, and for sharing with us today this wonderful research of which you should be proud, and we are proud as well. Thank you for what we have heard, and for the thoughts for the future, particularly for law, and for obviously for other disciplines, but particularly your place in law and legal education. So I think at this point, Richard will join me, and we will actually give Jacinta the thing.
So, congratulations. A small gift of appreciation for your hui. And it is my honour to present with you, the lid breaks off sometimes, so I've got to be careful, the 2022 University of Otago Distinguished Researchers. Karo will come in with karakia and bless the kai. For those in the room, kai will be served in those in the spillover room if we're the fan zone. If we are, we should have enough to share. kauranga. So, in proceedings and gets the car.
Kia ora mō rā tātou. E ngāri tunu nā mihi kia pera Jacinta me tō whānau. Ko whakawhiwhia nei me ki tēnei tohunga o te awa. O tira, ka mihi tunu kia. Kia koe hoki e mua nei hera mai nei mai tama. Tai mātou kia tātou katoa e tau. O reira kia iwe e tātou. E iwa te matua te tamate wai ka tapu tuku whakamuni te tuku tāpau i tēnei iwi nā mātou. Reira wa te tuki nā ua tana katoa e pāne ki tēnei o mātou i whakawhiwhia nei ki tāo nei e tō mātou watu. O reira kai tino e te tangi tira tika koe kia tautunu mai tā manaki ina kia mātou katoa. Aki e tahi roa o mātou i hoki atu nei ki te kā māu i tō mātou watu. Kia tau mai tā manaki ina kia rātou katoa. Kia tai pai e tō mātou watu. O tira kia mātou tūna kainai no hake nei tō mātou watu. Kia tautunu mai tā manaki ina kia mātou katoa tai mātou ki tūtu mō tēnei. Kia haere ni tunu koe ki waini nui a mātou kia tapotahi e i mō mātou nā tau kia. E iwa e te matua te tamate wainga tapu e tuku kumui miti atunu ki kia koe mo te tamo te ora kai te whakahora hia mai ki ngai o mātou warawaro. Hei whakaora tinana, hei whakaora waigua. Whakawhetai atunu mātou o teitei no te matua koroni e toi ngā tapu. Amen.